Maybe stolen is... They did. They stole me. They tricked my mother. They tricked my mother and they took me. Row upon row we cowered, between sheets threadbare but crisp and brittle like sheets of white glass, tucked too tight by our own childish hands, tiny fingers trained on chilly mornings. In the art of jail corners, we were told. This is how you'll make your beds in prison. Some of us not yet 10 years old. Everybody should have known better. Because you're dealing with little children. That was the start of it. Most of those girls that I knew then, I ran into later on, years later in prison. Arriving at Dame Phyllis, I actually thought my life was over. I didn't know whether I'd live long enough to get out. I didn't know what was going to happen in 4 years. Just seemed like too far away. I couldn't see the end of it. The system had me from 2 years old, you know. They probably had me before that because they had my mother. And they probably had her mother before her. So the system already had me. It could never let me go. I couldn't get away from it. Eventually you have to sort of work with the system rather than against it. I was in prison when John Howard banned all sentenced prisoners from voting. He started off by banning prisoners doing 5 years and under, then 3 years and under, and then he just stripped the right away altogether. John Howard said that we were undesirable elements of society who were unlikely to vote anyway. Oh, I was outraged. We've got to do something about this. John Howard's not my favourite person in the world anyway, but that particular step, it was just such a cynical and typical of his attitude towards people, you know, and I mean people, human beings. I just had to defy him. Education's probably been the most important thing in my life.
And when did you first start to receive a university education?
In prison. But it's made me more politically aware. It's made me more aware of social justice issues and human rights. And it did give me a great sense of being able to do something, of not just being totally powerless and helpless within this system.
Vickie was referred to us by the Prisoner Advocacy Network. She came to us as someone who was profoundly interested in human rights, prisoners' rights, women's rights, Indigenous rights, and by consequence was particularly interested in and personally impacted by this legislation. We'd spoken to a number of other people, both prisoners and politicians. Ultimately, none of those people wanted to proceed with the case for various personal, political and financial reasons. It was Vickie who was prepared to stand up at potential significant personal risk. It's well known that prisoners who buck the system get screwed over. There was also a significant financial risk. Had Vickie lost the case, there was a substantial risk that she'd be the subject of an adverse costs order, meaning she'd have to pay the costs of the Commonwealth and the states that intervened in the proceeding, and that was particularly significant for her given that her release was imminent.
I would have never been able to do it on my own. People like Phil Lynch from the Human Rights Law Resource Centre, he came in and spent a lot of time with me, going over the case, talking about the case, explaining the legal concepts to me. We did the appropriate paperwork and he did all the submissions and all the running around. The case for me was about the government saying, we don't like your kind, we don't want your kind, and that's it, you're out. We don't want to hear from you. You exclude somebody by taking away their right to vote. You've excluded that person from the community. Why then would they want to observe that community's laws or anything? Because they don't belong. They've been excluded. I always felt like a kid in a world full of adults, and then even when I was an adult, I belonged to little subgroups here and there, you know, drug addict, street person, Aboriginal person, all these little subgroups, but not part of mainstream society at all. And of course, once I'd been to prison, it was actually probably the girls' homes that started me feeling like that, like I was a different type of person to everyone else. Even though I wasn't able to be at court for the actual hearing, I tried to imagine it, or I tried to picture it while I was in there. It was pretty amazing being stuck there and knowing it was happening and wondering if and how you were going to get the news.
I thought it was critical that we seek to vindicate the right, but given the composition of the court and recent constitutional judgments of the court, I didn't expect to win. The registry read out the summary, and it wasn't until the last line of the summary that it was disclosed that we'd actually won the case, and it was quite an ecstatic moment.
There was a phone call from Phil Lynch. They actually let me talk to him, and he told me the news. It was pretty exciting. I felt like jumping up and down and screaming and carrying on. I knew that they'd all be celebrating, and yeah, it was a wonderful victory. And yeah, I went back to my unit and told the girls that I lived with. We won. You can vote now. Aboriginal people have very little political voice as it is. So many of us are in prison. Out of those people that regained the right to vote, 24% of those would have been Aboriginal. I've been out just over 12 months now, about 13 months. Sometimes it still feels like I got out yesterday. I've got a year to go for my PhD. Yes, we're hoping. The judge in my case said there was little prospect of my rehabilitation. I hope he's reconsidering his words now. And I think he probably is. So that, I suppose they can't be right all the time.